welcome back. Welcome back to the cabin. Why don't you come on in? It's kind of rainy out. We want to have some fun here at the cabin today. And I figure you guys must be bored with all your self-isolating. And I'd say we're about 6 feet apart. So I think that's a pretty safe distance for now. So today I'm here just at the cabin checking things out. Got to check on the sap again, see if my lure did anything. Did I get any pics on the trail cam? And I want to talk to you a little bit about our forest grocery store and a few cool plants and mushrooms we can take a look out for in the coming month or so. And I want to talk to you about making your own source for yeast, because I know some of you guys are out of yeast in your grocery stores and are wondering what to do if you're, baking or if you're brewing. So we'll talk about some sources of wild yeast, and we'll also make our very own ginger bug, which is a source of yeast for your baking and your wild crafted drinks. So lots to talk about today, lots of fun. Let's do it. Well, we're pretty much here in Ontario, kind of locked down. Essential workers are only allowed to go to work right now. Things have really changed. I think things are going to be like this for a long time around here. So cases are kind of skyrocketing in the US and in Ontario and in Quebec too. Quebec's probably got double the amount of cases we have. So that's kind of scary actually. So I'm glad to be back here at the cabin, very nice and isolated, perfect place to be to hang out and not get bored. So as you guys know, I set up 4 taps this year. The first batch turned out really good. So it's been a while since I've been back. It's not advisable really to let sap sit out too long, but I've got them in these 20-liter pails here, and woo, look at this. Oh, just teetering on the edge there. That might just, as that snow melts out, that pail would have tipped right over. So I'm glad I'm here today. Same with this one. Let's just take a look inside and see what we've got. Oh yeah, nice and full. Perfect. So let's have a little feel of the other one over here. It's rained a bit, so there's a bit of water on top. But if you put your tubing kind of in the side like this, then the rain doesn't contaminate and get into the bucket. Some people put the hoses in through the top. I don't do that. This way, if it's tucked under the lip, you're less likely to get contamination in there. So let's take a look at this one. Little sneak peek in there, and it's full too. So right now we're under a total fire ban. So the highest level fire ban, except for maple syrup producers. If you have a wood stove or a wood-fired or evaporator, because otherwise the fire department has no time to be rushing around putting out bushfires and stuff like that right now. I mean, obviously if they have to, they have to, but all the resources are getting taken away towards this COVID situation. So basically right now, no fire, no open fire. So here I'd love to boil some sap down over a nice hot fire, but can't do it. It's not allowed, even with a burn permit. All burn permits are canceled right now. So you have to basically be a maple syrup producer and have, wood-fired evaporator, or, you can use a wood stove in that, but you cannot have an open fire. So I think that's the best thing, given our resources are quite thin right now. So these 2 buckets you see here, I'm going to empty them out and bring them home then, since we're under the ban. I empty them into 2 other 20-liter pails, and I bring them home and boil them down. I've got some syrup already. So I was right, the first 2 buckets that I had, I made about 3/4 of a liter of maple syrup, and it's an extra light, that's the old term, it's like actually a golden maple syrup. So it's a very light color, allows a lot of light transmission, and very sweet. You can have it on your pancakes or waffles. It's a delicacy. I really love extra light, or golden is a new term for it, maple syrup. It's really tasty. As the season goes on, we tend to get a little bit different color maple syrup, the ambers and the darks and the extra dark. Those are nice for cooking, like the dark one, the really dark one, and that's great. And I was even thinking next year I might even tap the birch here. We have a lot of birch, and you can tap birch as well and make a really nice syrup. It tastes a little bit like molasses if you guys have ever had it. I had it once about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was really good. Now, I didn't make my own that time. I tried another producer's, and it was fantastic. But the ratio to boil down is about 100 liters of sap of birch for 1 liter of syrup for birch, where you're looking at your maples around 40-1. Someone noted in my last video that I wasn't tapping a sugar maple, and that's right. Around here I have a lot more red maple than sugar maple. Red maple is still awesome to tap, and it tastes really good. I honestly cannot tell the difference between sap that's made from syrup rather that's made from a red maple versus a sugar maple. So there's many maples that can be tapped. Of course, a sugar maple has the highest sugar content, so less boiling for you. But if I was blindfolded in a taste test and you had sugar maple syrup versus red maple syrup, I couldn't tell you the difference. It's really, really good. So don't be afraid to tap your red maples. We just have an abundance of them here. I do have sugar maple, like I said, further up on the ridge. I got to get better access in there though. Just heading over to where I have the martin box now, where I put some lure there. I don't see a ton of tracks or anything, but I'll be persistent. At least it's holding up. Maybe needs a new paint job. All right, next, I'm gonna go check on the trail camera situation. I put a little bit of lure in and around there as well. Things are still kind of waking up. Oh, look at this. Look at this, I just got distracted here because I saw some mushrooms. So we'll talk a little bit about spring foraging as well. Things are gonna start happening really soon. I can see something like a mouse has been knittering away at these. Beautiful, feels like velvet. It's a polypore mushroom. You've got a lot of little pores underneath and a nice squishy cap. So you know what, even though it's cold out, they're mushrooms. They're gonna start coming out. So here you can see I've got a little raccoon on the camera. See his eyeballs right there. So not a crazy amount of activity in this spot, but that's okay. I can't wait for the moose to show up. That's really who I care about. And I'm surprised. There's usually foxes and bears that go by as well. So we'll see what happens. Oh, hi, you're pretty close. They don't get afraid of you. Once you start to feed the chickadees, they know exactly who you are when you walk through the woods. And here we go. We've got a coyote paw right there. So definitely got some coyotes in the area. It's quite common actually to have them hidden around the cabin. I just scared the grouse off the drumming log up here. I want to go show you guys when you hear a grouse drumming in the spring, maybe you don't know where they do that. I'm going to show you a drumming log just up here that there's been a grouse that's been using that thing for years. I'm pretty sure it's the same guy. They do that to attract mates in. So this is a really good spot in the property here to find grouse. Let me go show you what a drumming log looks like. As I'm heading over to the log, I'm looking down and I see deer tracks. So the deer are coming out of their wintering grounds and they're from their deer yards and poking around the property. So that's excellent news. We'll start seeing them on the trail cams as well soon. Well, here is a really, really, really old tree that is falling apart. And here is the big part of the trunk that has fallen down, is decaying, covered in beautiful moss. But what do I see ahead? Grouse sign. Let's go check it out. Bingo. So what we see here are grouse droppings. So this is the ruffed grouse. So what happens is the male stands on here. It's a really nice, large, flat log, and oh, very nice. That is not a grouse. That's a flicker. So yeah, the grouse goes on here and drums in a beautiful display. I've got it on camera only once after hanging out for a long time to get that imagery. And the sound is made by the rapid flapping of the grouse's wings. It's the male grouse that does this. And then females come from far and wide, and then they pair up and have babies. We've had a few clutches around the area. I remember one year they were so small, they were about this big, and they were flying around whacking into bushes and stuff like that. It was pretty funny seeing them. They're really silly when they're young, and it doesn't seem like they're that smart anyways. But so that's what a drumming log looks like for a grouse. And so there's one that's been here. The stool's pretty fresh. And yeah, there's lots of other ones in this area. It's great. So you don't always have to clean up your property of these fallen logs. They're useful for all the critters. I know a lot of you are experiencing shortages with your groceries and paper products, so I wanted to briefly just talk a bit about some things that you should know about, that us wildcrafters know about to help you get through these tough times. So in terms of yeast, I know it can be really hard to find these days. There are wild sources of yeast that you can use to kind of make a culture to use for bread or wild sodas or things like that. So yeast are organisms, and they're found on lots of different things in the wild. One of my most favorite sources of wild yeast is found in raw honey. So when I use that with some distilled water and some of my fruits and things like that. When I make wild sodas, the wild yeast in the honey actually does the fermentation for me. So it's a bit slower, for example, than if you were to go to the store and buy really activated, bread yeast and things like that. But it is something that can be a resource to you, pasteurized honey. So it's something that you can consider is, raw honey. But again, you'd have to make a little culture of the bugs and let them grow up a bit before using them. And there's lots of resources online to help you do that for your recipes. Another thing to consider, wild yeast can be found in lots of different things, including lots of organic fruits and veggies and roots and stuff like that. So wild blueberries, organic blueberries can be used as well. You'll notice a white coating of powder on them, and that's actually biofilm that contains wild yeast on there. So quite often in some of my wild sodas, I'll add a bunch of organic blueberries or wild blueberries, and then by the time you know it, it's fizzing away and I have a really awesome soda. This past summer, I ended up actually making a wild yeast culture using cones from conifers. So I'm just going to show you an example. This is like an old one I found off the ground. Obviously, you're not going to do that. But on the surfaces of these, when you get fresh cones, and I forget which ones I used, whether I used balsam fir cones. I'm not really sure what I used. I have to look back at my notes. But they're nice and fresh, stuck to the tree high up. They had a little bit of, sap on them and things like that. So I did an experiment. I'd never done this before. But what I did is I put some really fresh and clean ones into some distilled water with sugar, because of course yeast need a sugar source. And boy, oh boy, was it bubbling away. And, for my recipes, you can certainly use some of the fluid from that contains the activated wild yeast in your recipes or your drink recipes. So it's a bit of an art to it. One of my favorite authors that knows a lot about this topic is Pascal Baudard. He does a lot of wild crafting, and in his book he lists numerous different kinds of ways to procure wild yeast and how to make cultures of them so you can use them in your wild crafting. Now's the time to start scouting your forests and taking a look at what's around, start identifying trees and learning about how to identify trees so you know where to find particular mushrooms. Very soon, we're going to be looking for dryad saddle in the spring. That's one of the first things I find, along with morels. So let's take a look. Got lots of deadfall here, and some mushrooms grow on live wood, some grow on dead things. In my area here, I tend to find a lot of dryads on, ironwood. Over here, we don't have an edible mushroom, but what we do have are the birch polypore. And this is an old one. This is a birch polypore from last fall. So this, when it's nice and fresh, it can be used to, sharpen knives. It's called the razor strop fungus. And you can also cut part of the top off. And this top coating on the birch polypore here, when it's a fresh mushroom, can actually be used to make band-aids and things like that. So, don't need to go to the drugstore to get that. Need a little band-aid for a small cut. Nice fresh birch polypore. Just make a nice square slice and peel back the top coating, the top layer of this polypore, and you can wrap it around your finger. It sticks to itself. So, good time to kind of identify trees, get out there, learn a few of the fungi we're going to start seeing in the spring. Here we go with a white birch, nice paper birch there. Well, good thing I'm doing some scouting. Looks like I just came across a nice berry bush here. So we've got a lot of thorns there, so that's cool. So I've got another one right here. So just scout out, take a look at your grocery store. Shipment's coming soon once things warm up and the snow melts, but there's a nice, it's a nice fruit shrub. You don't have to go to the grocery store in town to get all of your groceries. Now's the time, now that we're all kind of home and isolating, to do a little bit of research, learn about identifying plants and mushrooms that you can eat in the wild and how to safely prepare them. So when we're inside working on this ginger bug, I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite books, or a couple of books that you probably would really enjoy to get started. So I do have some exciting news to share with you guys. I had a bunch, but then some of that got kiboshed by the whole COVID-19 situations. You'll have to stay tuned for those things once this pandemic settles down a bit. But looks like I'll be getting a puppy this spring. I'm so excited. So the puppy's going to be arriving. I'm hoping to pick the puppy up sometime in May. we'll see how this goes with everything. So, I mean, this is like the most stressful thing. I know I just want a puppy. And, now this whole pandemic thing is kind of putting a monkey wrench in things, but it'll happen. It'll happen. So I just want to show you a cute little picture of the puppy. All right, so here are the little puppies. How cute are they? Oh my gosh, look at the face. Look at the face. So the back three there, those are males, and the front one's a female. And it looks a little crazy in their crate right now because they just had supper. So you can see the little guy right there sitting in the food dish, and the other little guy passed out at the back. Look how cute. Little faces. Oh my goodness. So what these dogs are, they're Bouvier de Flandre. So they're a dog from Belgium, and they're a kind of a country dog. They are very protective, but they're very, very friendly dogs if you raise them properly, and tremendously loyal and very, very intelligent. And they can do herding, carting, police work. There's no real limit on what they can do. So my hope is to train the dog for scent work, to basically find mushrooms for me. So, because it's so hard, everything looks the same on the forest floor. So, I mean, we're getting morel season and dryad season. Every, edible mushroom that I really love has a very distinctive smell to it. So my hope is to do some scent work with the dog, and so that when we're going through the forest, I can train the dog to sort of sit down if it finds a mushroom and maybe bark, let me know where it is, and then I'll go find it and find the mushroom. So that is my ultimate goal. We'll see if this dog will want to do that. Of course, you start learning about their personalities once you bring them home. So we'll find out what this dog's going to be good at, but that is what my goal is for this little one. Also, probably, when it's over 2 years old, might have it sort of come on in with a sled, could carry a light load in the sled on a harness. Some people ski door with them, so I'm really looking forward to doing something like that. But that's a couple of years down the line. You don't want to do that when they're not skeletally mature or something like that. So anyway, the puppies are 4 weeks old. Well, be probably 5 weeks old actually by the time you guys see this video. They're pretty fun, so more pictures and video will be coming. And I'm really, really hoping that things settle down enough that I can go down in May and pick up the dog, or we have to figure out how to get the dog. The breeder's going to tie it to a tree, and then I'll go get it, and then, we wave at each other from the distance or something. I don't know. This is such a strange world right now. But anyway, it's such a relief to have such positive news, and I was super excited to get an email from the breeder with a picture of my dog. So anyway, stay tuned. Lots more coming up on that. So now you have a lot of time on your hands, here are some books, and I know you could probably even get them online as ebooks, or rent them from your library online as an ebook. The Wild Crafting Brewer by Pascal Baudard, The Complete Mushroom Hunter by Gary Linkoff, Edible Wild Plants by Elias and Dykerman, and Adventures in Edible Plant Foraging by Karen Monger. So these are, some of the top 4 favorite books for learning a bit about wild edible plants and wild crafting and hunting for mushrooms. Here is one of my favorite spring mushrooms. This is in the Mushroom Hunter book. This is the morel mushroom, and it is so very tasty. When they come up on the forest floor, they look like that, and I generally find them under, hardwood trees. Sometimes I'll find them near conifers as well. So I follow a lot of foragers on Instagram, and it looks like in the South in the US, Alabama, you guys have some morels out right now. So if you're walking through the woods, take a look around, even just observationally, see if you can find them under hardwoods. One really key thing about a true morel is that when you cut it in half, it is hollow all the way through. Here's a picture in the book that demonstrates exactly what I'm talking about. I also did a video on the difference between morels that are false and true morels. So this is a true morel, and you cut it all the way through. You can see it's just very hollow and continuous all the way around. So there's a few false lookalikes. This is a Gyromitra species. It looks like a brain, and when you're to cut it in half, there's lots of different little chambers to it. Another one that's not a true morel is a half-free morel, and if you're to cut it through, you'd sort of see the cap attached underneath to the base. So during this time of isolation, I want you guys to learn a bit more about morels. You can even Google it online and take a look at what you're looking for. That's one important thing about foraging for mushrooms and plants, is you really, really, really want to spend a lot of time learning about them before you go out and even consider looking for them and eating one. God forbid you make a mistake. So now's the time. We've got lots of time on our hands. Do a little research, and when you're out, maybe if you're allowed to go out in your community for an isolated walk in the woods, then you can maybe take your camera and go looking for them and take some pictures. Then you can start learning more and more about them, so you can develop confidence looking for them. Once you train your mind to find these mushrooms, on the forest floor, it's amazing how many you'll find. So another one I want you guys to keep your eyes out for this spring and learn about is the dryad saddle. It's a consolation prize if you don't find any morels. I find that the dryad saddle, the pheasant back mushroom, as it's also called, is found on decaying hardwoods. So I find it here on ironwood. I also find it on maple as well. Of course, this mushroom, to be ingested, like a lot of wild mushrooms, must be cooked or prepared. So I take the very thin, tender young edge of the dryad saddle, usually when it's about the size of sort of my fist here. And that can be used and sliced up really nicely, and you can make them into pickles. And that's what I did last year. It was really good. I made jalapeno dryad saddle pickles. Very, very tasty. I've also pan fried them as well. So what they look like, they, of course, they grow off of the dead hardwood there. And what happens is they look like the back of a hawk's wing or the back of a pheasant. And they have kind of little scales to them. And they kind of grow off a tree like a shelf. Underneath there are pores as well, and the pores should be nice and white and bug free. And like I said, when they're harvested, they're about the size of your hand. So even go out there this spring by yourself on your little self-isolation walk and take some photos if you guys find them in your area. Definitely send me a message with pictures if you found some morels or some dryad saddle. That's your homework from the Wild Yam. Talking a bit more about edible wild plants, these two books are really great. Let's have a quick peek. So birch trees are, as I mentioned, a real asset to have in your forest. The birch polypore grows on there, which is a medicinal fungus that I showed you, and you can use the parts of it for a Band-Aid or to sharpen your knife, or even as a fire starter if it's really dry. And I've used the twigs and branches of the yellow birch myself to make a lovely yellow birch tea. It has that wintergreen flavor for the yellow birch, so you can kind of chomp on the little twigs there, and has a really nice wintergreen flavor. Also has mild anti-inflammatory in it too, so if you have a sore gum or something like that, and I don't know, whatever you burnt yourself with a pizza, you can chew on a twig of birch, and it'll kind of provide a little bit of numbing to that area. Same with willow as well. So birch are really awesome to have around, and they are another source of wild yeast as well. A lot of trees, the bark as well as some fresh leaves like maple leaves and birch leaves have wild yeast on them. So they can also be used to make a wild yeast starter. In addition, as I talked about, to the conifers and those fresh conifer pine cones, that's another great source of wild yeast. Another thing I wanted to point out, dandelions. My goodness, you can use dandelions for pretty much everything. You can some people make little cookies with the little flowers in there, makes them nice and pretty. The leaf part can be used for salads. The roots, some people use, for coffee substitute, things like that. One other thing to notice about the dandelions is that the flowers too are also a source of wild yeast. So if you put the flowers in with some sugar and distilled water, you'll have a really active fermentation in no time. So dandelions are awesome. They provide a lot of vitamins, including vitamin C. So if you're not feeling great, you can make a dandelion tea. Also, some folks like to make dandelion jelly, obviously using the petals from the flower. So we're all going to get dandelions really soon. Don't overlook them. Don't mow them down. We do need them for our bees. So some bees overwinter here in Ontario, and they go underground and they'll come out and they're just dizzied and very, very weak, and they need these flowers to provide energy for them to get back on track. The ones that overwinter, the big bumblebees, as you know, they are the female. So if you save a female bee, you're saving an entire generation of bees for that year. So that's pretty cool. One of my favorite spring wild edibles are the ramps wild leek, and they taste really garlicky and really nice. You can see what the leaves look like there. They're leaves of 2, and they have a stem and a bulb at the end that looks like that. They're becoming scarce, so I really don't advise taking the bulbs. What I do is I use the leaves for salad, so I'll just take one of the 2 leaves, and I won't touch more than a third of a large stand of them because I really don't want to decimate the population. But this is so good. You can make them in salads, soups. Yeah, man, you can just do anything with these. They're so good and have a nice, strong garlicky flavor. So one of the trees we have around here at the cabin is a linden or basswood. And did you know that in the early spring, you can collect the tender leaves that are still a little bit fuzzy and the flowers just as they're opening to make a syrup that's really, really actually medicinal, the purported benefits for the respiratory tract, say if you had a cold or something like that. So they can be harvested as well, and the leaves can be used in salads. So that's pretty cool. Lots of basswood around here. They tend to be, plentiful. And, even taking a small amount of leaves and flowers for a syrup, for example, you're really not going to damage these trees. There's tons of leaves on these trees. Let me tell you, they tend to grow in a clump. Let me just show you what it looks like. So right in front of me is a huge cluster of basswood there. So a massive tree. I've got them there and there and there. So, and they're all over too, like even over in the field a little bit farther away is a clump of basswood as well. So definitely something you can consider to harvest, the leaves, the early leaves and flowers. Here's a massive basswood. They're great for carving as well. This is what the buds on the basswood or linwood tree look like right now. Not too long and we'll have little tiny leaves. So let's just take a look at the Elias and Dykman book here, Edible Wild Plants. I really like it because it organizes things by season. So here you see we have the spring season. And one more spring wild edible I want to introduce you to that you should keep a lookout for very soon is the ostrich fern. So I did a lot of foraging of these. They're also called fiddleheads. And this book is great because it tells you what to look for, how to harvest them, when to harvest them, and how to prepare them safely. So they're really easy to identify. They're curled up like a fiddlehead and they aren't overly hairy. And when you cut them in half, they look like a piece of celery. They're kind of hollowed out. So you can check out one of my videos last year when I did some foraging for fiddleheads, and the description of them is listed right here. Like any wild edible, the fiddleheads also have to be prepared safely. I usually boil mine for a good 10 to 15 minutes, usually around 10 minutes, to make sure the toxins have leached out of them. So there's good information, I think, on the CDC website about preparing fiddleheads, and you can also find that online. And of course, if you're more interested in making things like wild yeast starter cultures and ginger bugs, this book, The Wild Crafting Brewer by Bodar, is really going to be an awesome resource for you. He goes ahead and lists some of really great wild yeast sources that may be familiar to you in your region, because everybody has different things in their areas. Look at that prickly pear for you guys out there in the desert. They're a great source of wild yeast. Like I mentioned earlier, the tree barks, unripe pine cones, and wild grape. That's one I forgot to mention as well. They tend to have a nice little white bloom on them, and they're a great source of yeast for your cultures. I was going to show a quick picture here. Basically here Pascal was using some juniper berries. Now, not all junipers are edible, so make sure you haven't, you want to use a starter culture from a fruit or a plant that is edible. You don't want to get toxicity there. But so what he does is he adds that in there as a wild yeast source, sugar, and of course the distilled unchlorinated water. And it's just awesome. There's lots of stuff out there in nature. You don't have to worry about going to the store. So for your wild yeast starter, we're making a ginger bug. And this is how it's done. So here we go. We need organic ginger because it hasn't been treated to rid it of bacteria or fungi. If you get the ginger that is non-organic, it's really not going to work. We need to have that wild yeast on there. And the wild yeast is found on the surface of the ginger. So here I've grated up some ginger. You want to leave the skin on as well as, the other little pieces that you get there, and chop it as finely as you can. And here I have a half a cup of white sugar. You could use cane sugar as well if you wanted to. So what I do is, there we go, there's some water as well. So very simple to make your own wild yeast starter. So let's get a clean jar that you've sterilized. You kind of want to boil it in hot water for about 10 minutes or so, just to reduce the risk of getting bacteria or other yeast in there that you don't want. All right, so I've grabbed my jar here. You can also use any other kind of canning jar. What we're going to do is put the ingredients in here, and then we're going to mix it up. And we'll put a paper towel over top because you need to let this breathe while the yeast are growing and thriving. All right, so I'm going to put my half a cup of sugar in here, and I'm going to dissolve it in about 500 mils of water. So that basically boils down to 2 cups of water. An important note about the water is that you want to use distilled water. You don't want to use chlorinated water or you're going to kill off the yeast. There's our second cup. I'm just going to kind of stir it up a little bit. So now this is going to be the medium for your yeast to grow. Got a few little yeast, got a few little flecks of ginger on my spoon there. That's what you see there. So we're going to add 3 tablespoons of the ginger to this recipe. Just adding that in there. I'm realizing this jar is a little bit smaller than I envisioned, the one that I brought from home. So I might have to just decant a little bit of the liquid off, but that's what it's going to look like. Well, that looks really good. Just took a couple of tablespoons or so off the top of my container because it was going to overflow, and I don't want that. You want a bit of air actually at the surface. So the next step is I'm going to take a cloth or a little tiny piece of paper towel here, put it over the surface of the jar, and I'm going to use this elastic to tie it onto the top of the jar here. We don't want fruit flies or other critters getting into your ginger bug while things are getting started. And that's how it's going to look like. So we've got the top on there right now. You're going to need to feed it twice a week with until it really gets going. You'll need to feed it with 1 tablespoon of water, a tablespoon of sugar, and add in a bit more of the grated ginger, probably another tablespoon twice a week till it really gets going. So what do I mean by it getting going? Well, when you look at the surface of it each day, you should start to see little clear bubbles forming on the top. You probably also will see bubbles kind of coming off of the bottom where other ginger pieces are, and that's what we want. We want a really active culture. Once things are really active, then you can begin to use it. So after a few days of having the cloth on there, things are going well, then you can close the lid. And I like to store mine in the fridge. Love these little jars. You can just kind of latch it down. And I will store mine in the fridge, but keeping in mind that you got to feed these things once a week, once things get going, with a tablespoon of sugar and a bit more ginger to keep things going. In the initial stages, you probably want to stir it a little bit. So you can either, when the cloth is on there, you take it off, you inspect, and you stir it with a spoon, or you can pop the lid on and just kind of do one of these things to mix it up because the sugar wants to settle out on the bottom. You might get a bit of settling, but you want to mix it up. So just me shaking it like that, it made little bubbles. And so that's not the yeast activating, by the way, but that's kind of what you would expect to see, big layer of bubbles there when things are active. Because there's a gas formed, you got to check it frequently. Pressure does build in these containers, so you have to pop the lid, let the gas off, and close the lid back down again for storage. You can store it at room temperature, especially if you're using it more frequently. However, I don't use it as frequently sometimes, and I'll put it to sleep, as I call it, in the fridge. And that really slows down the fermentation process and the sort of the budding of the yeast. So you can use it in the long term. I've had many of my cultures survive many, many, many months, and they could probably survive years if I didn't forget about them in the back of the fridge. You got to remember to feed them though. Each week, once it's sort of a mature culture, you should feed it with a tablespoon of sugar and a tablespoon of the grated ginger. And of course, adding water and sugar and ginger as you deplete the stock. So for your ginger bug, you can use it as directed for your recipes. When I use it for my wild crafted sodas, I use 1/3 of a cup of it as my yeast starter to about 2 liters of, water, with my sugar and my berries in it, for example, for my wild sodas. So it works really well. And again, once you add it as a starter culture, you pitch it into your drink, for example, that you're making. It does take, many more days as well for that drink to start fermenting and to create the wonderful flavors that we all love in wild sodas and our beers and our wines. For, food recipes using this as yeast, be sure there's probably lots of recipes online that show you how to use the ginger bug in the recipe that you're looking for. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode, everyone. Remember to stay safe, and I'll see you guys next week for another adventure. Have a good one. Take care.